I am live. I'm reading A Vacant Vacation. It is a book by Joan Marshall Grant about her travels through France in 1946 with Charles, her then husband. She was a writer of her farm memories, and she wrote 7 wonderful books about ancient Egypt and Rome, etc. Anyway, we are here on chapter 34, entitled High Sunday. I do not often go to church, for the shift of level which prayer requires occurs more easily when I'm alone, and seldom at times which happen to coincide with the hours of organized religion. So I was not particularly enthusiastic when Charles suggested we should attend High Mass at Saint-Germain-des-Prés. I've never found it possible to believe that a man can become a priest only through the acquisition of scholarship and an act of formal ordination. So from previous experience, I expected the water in the stoup to be no more than water. But this was charged, cold fire to the forehead, warm with vitality. Surprised and humble, I stood with Charles at the back of the church, for even the aisles were crowded. Instead of sorry penitence, there was joy, which might have belonged to a festival of Egypt in a wise dynasty. Negroes and soldiers in uniform, women in gay clothes, and women in shabby black, children who found no fearful solemnity, but brightness clear as the candles of Christmas. And most of the people were young, instead of crabbed age, intent on personal salvation. 3 priests in green and scarlet performed the ancient ritual of significant gesture. Here was no need to kneel, to sing, to fumble a prayer book, or to be exhorted, and so the thread of music by which our hearts rose up remained unbroken. Stop. Shh. Remained unbroken. At the elevation of the host, the people were at this time one company, for the blessing was manifest as sudden light or bells in silence. We left before the close of the service and stood at the top of the steps in front of the west door. It is good to find priests are recognized beyond their ritual, I said. Forgive me for being reluctant to come here. I was afraid of the emptiness I expected to find. You had forgotten Chartres? No, but how many other churches were empty for me, and for Carola also. But it is coming back, as we knew, in the mountains, though no one will find it who looks for it only in labels. Instead of Sunday melancholy, there were children jostling round a stall which sold coloured papers on the pavement outside. We paused to watch them and then walked down the Rue Bonaparte to the Préau Clerc, which was one of our favourite restaurants. We had jambon morvandel, and trout, and soufflé grand marnier. While we were drinking coffee, Charles said with decision, being no longer in a country where God is supposed to be a killjoy, we might go to the races. We fetched the car and drove out through the Bois de Boulogne. Longchamp, with its flowers and its stands, which might have been built by confectioners as a memorial to sugar, had no formality to bring back dreary memories of Ascot in lace under the rain. Obviously we are about to acquire considerable francs, I said with confidence. It will be necessary only to back horses with significant names, or jockeys who wear pleasant colours, to establish my right to replenish my wardrobe. It is ridiculous to bet when you know nothing about the horses, the owners, the jockeys, or the form, said Charles, with a sudden reversion to Beatty tradition. He stood looking through the railings of the sacred precincts of the Jockey Club de France, approving the impeccable covert coats, the polished leggings, the heart-bitten faces, helmed by bowlers. If you insist on betting, he said, I could probably find someone to whom Peter Beatty and Boiroux Rossel are not unfamiliar. Family tradition maintains that Charles was born in a loose box at Newmarket, and that he rode before he could walk, but I was not in the mood to play idiot wife while men talked of matters beyond my comprehension. Today it was sufficient that horses had 4 legs, one at each corner, and some ran faster than others, according to chance. I've never quite recovered from the streak of luck, which caused me to pick 5 winners at Godwood on a flawless afternoon when I was young. And the 6th horse proved to belong to a policeman was a slight error, which my escort never divulged, for I swore that the penalties for such betrayal would be extreme. However, today 4 winners would suffice, and no doubt on the trot the remuneration would be adequate. I looked down the card, and an Egyptian name was obviously an omen not to be ignored. Had I not received newspaper cuttings when a horse of which I had never heard, called Winged Pharaoh, won its first race at impressive odds? The fact that I backed it in its next 2 races, by which it failed to acquire further merit, was a matter of no immediate consequence. Charles smiled benignly and said, if I wished to bet without knowledge, I could at least place the money myself. I moved to a more expensive guichet of the Puri Mutuelle, for it was only fair to back my views with decent sustenance. We watched the runners come out of the paddock. There was a little horse that looked as though it should have been taking children for rides in the Bois. A ewe-necked, long-backed, long-pasterned, blinkered, nervous roarer, dishing its feet. Has it really? I said anxiously, having seen the number and realized it was my choice. He laughed. I was only stringing words together from an almost forgotten vocabulary. A nice little horse, I said fondly, and so brave to compete with the ones who are so much bigger. It tried hard and was third, but of course I had not backed it for a place. That I selected 4 other losers was entirely due to Charles being so sure I could not pick a winner. Just in case there was any overconfidence left in me, he took us to Luna Park on the way home. I have an extreme distaste for all forms of amusement which are supposed to produce exhilaration, but to me are only sources of drooling cowardice. Luckily, Patver had returned to his duties, so the giant racer and kindred horrors were closed. But the sideshows were in full roar, and we fought our way through the crowd to the rifle range, or rather Charles fought. I followed like flotsam in the wake of a ship. I'm somewhat gun-shy, but by chance rather than skill I hit the bullseye twice running, and the other 3 shots at least registered on the target. Charles, needless to say, had to take the far more difficult mark of a card which revolved at the end of a string, and I thought he would be put off by a girl attending the booth who dodged backwards and forwards through the field of fire with a complete disregard for safety, which suggested she hoped for a rest in a hospital, or else wore a bulletproof vest. After Bisley, this should be easy, I said, hoping further to complicate his aim. Candidly, I think he was almost as surprised as the audience who made congratulatory exclamation of "Voilà l'anglais" when he got another possible at Luna Park. We were enjoying ourselves and should probably have stayed longer if I had not suddenly noticed the clock. "Charles," I said urgently, "I've just remembered that we're dining in an hour and we've got to change." We successfully hurled back to the hotel, but on the way to our party I unfortunately took a shortcut. I was certain that my landmarks were correct, but either the statue on which I set my course had been moved, or else it had several duplicates to delude the unwary traveller. We left after short hours of conversation about 1:30. It had started to rain and I was even less confident of the way. "We must ask where we are," I admitted at last, and Charles drew up beside 2 young men who were drudging along the dimly lit side street. We were near the hotel, but the directions were complicated, so they offered to come in the car as our pilots. "What about taking them somewhere for a drink?" I whispered to Charles, and he nodded. They took it as perfectly natural to be asked out by two complete strangers. Eventually we arrived at a boîte in Montmartre, where we danced and had champagne. They were both young architects in that difficult phase between the gaining of a degree and the confidence of the first job. "It's not easy to start in our profession," said the one we called Monsieur Labarbe, for his beard was luxuriant. "Sometimes one is confident that this is only the phase everyone goes through, but then sometimes one wonders if it is stupid not to choose an easier way of earning one's living." "I believe," said Raymond, "that we shall succeed. But it is reasonable when there are so many students and so few jobs." "Belief is seldom reasonable, but always necessary," I said vehemently, and then launched into personal history to try to show that I knew how they felt. "I'm a writer, but I only took to it when I was 27, and largely because I suddenly made up my mind for no logical reason. They seemed interested, so I went into more detail. I was sitting in a place rather like this, except, as it was in Kitzbühel, there was real snow, instead of murals of mountains, and someone at the table asked what each of us would do if we had a wish. Someone wanted a yacht, another to be able to win a gold ski. I forgot the rest. I suddenly got an attack of the sincerity which can be so embarrassing, and said I should like to write a book about the things I believe in, and to have the courage not to mind being laughed at. One of them remarked acidly, "Well, darling, we might get ours, but you haven't a hope, you can't even spell, and you haven't written a line." I lost my temper, stood up, and said with desperate conviction, "I bet you I'll do it by this time next year." I walked home through the snow and felt I had made a fool of myself, and I hated the lot of them. "But you did it," said Raymond. "I had to. You knew that you could." I made myself believe until it happened, as everything does if you want it enough. Monsieur Labarbe smiled. "It is easier to believe in the impossible after tonight. We were both very gloomy this evening, and then suddenly you both arrived in our lives, and here we are, having supper." "We shall remember," said Raymond, "even when we both think we are failures, we shall never again be quite sure." When you lose faith in yourselves, you may find that some Germain de Prés has something which kindles the heart. Did they find it? Perhaps, for they sent me a carnation. The next chapter is Tweety Birds, and I hope you have a good 22nd of January 2025.